Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Hack the Planet podcast, the only podcast that understands the inherent difficulties of transporting an entity from point A to point B. We are joined in the studio virtually today by our longtime friend from the hacker bar meetup that spawned us, or spawned this podcast, Pongo.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
Hey.
And Pongo is a bit of an expert on swarm intelligence, and we'll go into sort of what that means in a lot more detail. And is some kind of tribe leader for Ingress, or whatever you'd call that, which is the game. Now, hilariously, when Mitchell said, "Hey, we should do an episode about Ingress," my initial response was, "Great! I love picking locks. We could talk about like spoofing HID badges. We could bring in our lockpicker friends, And he's like, "No, not that sort of Ingress." So I was like, "Oh, you mean firewalls? All right." But no. This is something else entirely. So this is Ingress, capital I. The lessons learned from Ingress are kind of wide sweeping, and we're going to try to apply them to all kinds of strange places. We'll go around the room. Pongo, who said hi already. Hey.
Hey.
So we've all known Pongo for many years from the hacker meetup. Although to be honest, I had no idea what her superpower was until relatively recently, where I actually just went back and watched her old DEF CON talks. And we're also joined by Dan.
How's it going?
Dan. And Mitchell.
Good evening, everybody.
And Max is back.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Max. And once again, Virus.
My mic works now.
Uh,
So we won't get any more complaints about that?
yeah, so related to that, we actually had our one of the very, very few calls come in on the hacker helpline related to this, since we haven't had that many calls, because apparently you have to really, really screw up for one of our hardcore introvert listeners to actually call in. But here we go.
I want to know where I can submit $20 for Virus's Get a Better Mic campaign. I feel like he really needs it, and I think the podcast should help raise money for him. Thanks.
So, as it turns out, we didn't actually need to raise money. We had a bunch of mics on hand. We just had to get one to him, but we've done that now, so the problem is solved. Hopefully,
closed won't fix.
Patch
already applied.
I see you work for Canonical.
Yeah, nothing to see here. So it's all better now. But we do take calls. So you can leave us a message at the hacker helpline at area code 206-486-6272. That's 206. What is it? Gun narc? Something like that.
Gun narc.
Yeah. Gun narc.
Yeah,
that's my favorite.
Applies. Yeah.
All right. Well, so getting into it. So Pongo, I myself, I briefly played the game Ingress shortly after it came out in like 2014, really intensely for like 2 or 3 months, as I do, and then I got super bored with it and like switched to a different game I played for 2 months, and this is just my pattern. But my one Ingress claim to fame is that during the brief window of time I was playing it, I happened to be traveling to some islands where they didn't actually have cell towers, but they had Wi-Fi access points at like the hotels. So I created a bunch of portals, figuring no one can ever take my name off it, right? If there's no cell tower there. So I'm my one Ingress claim to fame is that I created the Galapagos Island Ingress portals.
Oh, that was you?
Yeah, and I have no idea if anyone's been back there since. So
They have. I actually have some keys to the Galapagos in my inventory right now, so thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's so. But past that, for those of our listeners who don't know what Ingress is, how do you? You're sort of like an expert Ingress user. So how do you think of it? How would you describe it?
Well, probably the easiest way to describe it nowadays would be if you've ever heard of Pokemon Go, it's the predecessor to that, and it was made by the same company, Niantic. So if you're familiar with Pokemon Go, it's a cell phone video game like Pokemon Go, where the object is to go places and perform actions on your phone in a vaguely sort of capture the flag kind of game. The difference between Ingress and Pokemon Go, or the biggest difference I would say, is that Ingress is directly competitive. That is to say, there are two opposing player teams. They compete with each other. There's a blue team and a green team, and only one team can own any given Pokestop, or as they're called in the game, portals, at a time. So basically the day-to-day game is a lot like capture the flag. If you want your team to capture all of the portals, you want to capture them from the other team. Points are scored in the game by connecting these portals to each other. You can only draw a line between these portals if your team controls both of them, and there are no intersecting lines between them. And additionally, you need a key. I mentioned it before. That is an item you can only obtain from the portal itself. So these are little virtual items that you can pass between players, but they can ultimately only be obtained by going there. So you score points in the game by making these triangular fields. The bigger the field, the more points, and the longer they stay up, the more points you get. So as you might have already guessed, at the sort of highest competitive, or some say trolling level of the game, people run around trying to find portals that are as remote and hard to get to as possible, because once one of those triangular fields is established, the only way you can take it down is by going there. So that's basically the game in the nutshell. I played this game pretty intensely for about the last 6 years, got pretty obsessed with it, and this game of making the biggest triangles possible, that was basically what I did. I became a strategist and a community organizer for a region that's roughly the size of Cascadia. And although the game is not nearly as popular as it once was, during its heyday, that comprised probably about 1,000 active players on our team.
I know that some of the gatherings they've had for Ingress have sort of set records for kind of online game community meetups and stuff like that. Like, it was a fairly big deal. And then when Pokemon Go came out, I have some like security cameras like facing out my front door, mainly so that I can see when my dogs freak out, if it's something I need to go deal with or not, or if I can just tell them to shut up. But the only sketchy people I ever see out there are like I used to see these like groups of like 3 or 4 people just gather in front of my driveway, all huddling over their phones, and I'd be like, that's so weird. And eventually I figured out they're either, out there trying to get Pokemon or capture an Ingress portal. It's basically one of the two.
Yep, very likely.
So that seems like, I remember when I was playing the game, it seemed very overwhelming to me. Like, it's very clear that you had to form a group or join a larger team or coordinate with a lot of people. And I just found that to be like really intimidating. Like, I couldn't figure out kind of how to make that happen. So it's really fascinating to me how you could have gotten so far with that kind of you could call it community organizing. And then so I saw that you did a DEF CON talk a couple years ago about sort of some lessons you learned from this, presumably. So it was like a talk about Ingress, but you didn't actually talk about Ingress very much at all. It was all these like abstract lessons you learned along the way. So I'm wondering if you could go into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I had been playing the game for for a few years, and I Well, I could go back to the beginning. I didn't actually want to get involved in community play at all either. It was my partner that kind of dragged me along into it. I am an introvert at heart, and the idea of going out to meet a bunch of strangers to play a cell phone video game didn't really appeal to me until he convinced me that I could get better gear that way. So one of the fundamental rules of Ingress is that in order to get the highest level gear, which you need to play the game competitively, is you need 8 people to all perform the same action on a portal. They don't all have to do it at once, but they need to do it before the other team captures it, and that basically unlocks the highest level gear of the game. So there is an incentive for cooperation. On the smallest scale, you get 8 people together and you can get good gear. When I had been part of the community and started playing for a while, and people started telling stories about these giant fields, I started to get a lot more interested in that, and started doing these field operations, which, in contrast to the only needing 8 people, a lot of times these would actually require dozens of people all working together just to do everything at the right moment. And not only do they have to coordinate, like removing these blocking links and going to capture these very remote portals, one thing about Ingress is that most actions in the game, basically anything but the most trivial action, will generate a public communications method that other players can read. And using the magic of technology, those messages can be used to basically plot your actions on a real-time map. So when you're doing something in the game, chances are there is somebody on the other team who is watching what you're doing. And when you're making these fields, if you're spending a lot of time taking down a lot of these blocking links, it's very easy for somebody on the other team to see what you're doing, and it becomes almost trivial for them to stop you. So a lot of these large operations had to be done not only with perfect precision in time and space, but also in perfect secrecy. So that was something that I thought was pretty interesting. I mean, it was, hey, secret war. So I got together with a couple of my friends and we did a couple of small fields, and they worked out pretty well. So I just started doing more and more of them until more and more people started getting interested, until eventually we started making these fields that would cover several states at a time. So they were pretty big and epic operations.
How did you sort of meet people or coordinate with people in the beginning?
A lot of us would coordinate. There is a communications log in the game itself that you can use to sort of talk to people who are near you. However, most of that is used just to get people on a more secure communications platform. I think at the time I started playing, everybody was using GroupMe, but Slack, Discord, Telegram, I think Signal was probably used. Yeah, there's all sorts of chat platforms that people use to organize, each with their own advantages and disadvantages. But after I met up with somebody in person, and they for my very first gear farm, and they gave me a bunch of gear and said, okay, come back this date and this time, and also don't tell anyone where you're going, because if the other team finds out, they're basically going to come and smash our farm. So make sure you don't tell anybody, but you can come and help us build these portals, and we'll all get some gear. After you do enough of those, and you kind of prove yourself as somebody who can show up on time, follow instructions, and keep a secret when necessary, then a lot of times they would let you participate in more high-risk, high-reward operations like these fields.
This is starting to sound a little bit like the IRA or something. You know, it's like cell-based, quasi-anonymous. But yeah.
Yeah, the comparison I hear more often is a lot like Eve. At the highest competitive levels of the game, there are a lot of spreadsheets. and a lot of intrigue. And I mean, we had a saying that politics is a side effect of cooperation in groups. So yeah, anytime you get a couple of people together, there's bound to be some disagreement over what needs to be done and who needs to do it.
Has there been any sort of like espionage or like sort of like double agents, as it were, that are both resistance and
Traitors.
I forget who, the Enlightened, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's something of a trope that if you have like a neighborhood Slack or Discord, and you have a couple of public rooms where you keep all of your new players and people who haven't been personally verified yet, that you'll usually have some double agents in those chats as well.
Nice.
But yeah, it even got to the point where whenever, in order to even be admitted into the community, you usually needed 2 or 3 people to meet up with you face to face, verify that you were who you said you were, and you would actually have to show them your scanner to prove that you were on the right team. So yeah, there were a lot of
It's a loyalty test with like a 2-person vouch scheme.
Yeah, and the number actually varied. I mean, anywhere from 2 all the way up to 8 or even more for certain kinds of operations. And of course, there were ways to get around it. Sometimes people would periodically change factions and keep screenshots of what their scanner looked like before they changed factions. So if they were trying to identify themselves to somebody from the other team, they would just show their old scanner and say, "Hey, look, I'm on your team." So, yeah.
You get to the point where the people actually need to watch you like kill a guy. I mean, take a portal or something live.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the other thing I remember. So this was one of the very first games. I don't know if it was the first, but it was definitely the first big game, or the first one that worked really well, that used the kind of GPS in the phone to figure out kind of where you were, and you had to physically go places in order to like access a portal, right?
Right.
And so my friend who got me into this in the beginning was using it kind of as an excuse to go hike in weird places, kind of like a geocaching or something like that. And but I think this led, kind of like my thing with the islands, I think this led to people going to just weird places at weird times of day to achieve certain objectives. So I wanted to ask you if you had any kind of extreme Ingress war stories. Like what's the weirdest place you ever went?
Oh, that I personally ever went, or that I ever asked somebody to go, because there's a difference. Yeah. So I'd say the weirdest trip that I ever took for the sake of Ingress had to do with we went to. If you've ever heard of a place called Hell's Gate, it's in the Fraser's Valley in British Columbia. It's basically a little touristy kind of it's like a touristy gold mining town. However, what's interesting about it from an Ingress point of view is that it's located in a ravine right above the Fraser River, and it is the portals inside of it are gated. You can only get there on a tour, and the tour only runs. The tour only runs during the summer. We, of course, wanted to go there during the winter because we wanted to go during a time that nobody else could go. And I had some friends in Canada who randomly bumped into one of the tour guides who happened to have keys to the Jeep and the gate, and managed to persuade him over an afternoon of drinks to arrange for a private tour for an undisclosed number of people. I think there ended up being 12 of us all told, but I remember going across the Canadian border in, I think it was February, and it was really not great weather. and being asked at the border, where I was going and what I was doing, and being so terrified that the person I was speaking to might actually play the game and be on the opposite side of on the opposite team that oh man, I don't remember the story that I made up, but I was clearly lying, and they decided that my car needed to be searched. They didn't find anything, fortunately, but I remember telling them that we were going up through Hope and then coming back through Vancouver, the Peace Arch crossing, because we wanted to have dinner in Vancouver. And this was just completely, I don't know why this was unacceptable. But anyway, trying to explain to somebody, to a border crossing agent, why you are going to a tourist attraction that is not open during any part of, or during that part of the year, to see basically a non-existent tourist attraction with a river underneath it. Nobody really knew. This was before Pokemon Go came out. Otherwise, I probably would have just told him I was chasing Pokemon. But that was, yeah, my off-season tour to the Fraser Valley was probably one of the weirdest weirdest trips that I personally ever took. But I'd say some of the places that I have asked other people to go are probably a lot more impressive. There was a tournament in California that I think it was in 2016. And I was basically in charge of this field game for the tournament, which basically meant that I was responsible for organizing the ground strategy for everything that happened outside of the play box, which was downtown San Diego. So we spent about 6 weeks, I think it was, capturing all of the most remote, hard-to-find portals that could possibly be useful to us. There was a guy during this campaign who actually kept a bug-out bag next to his desk at work on the off chance that we'd need him to go climb a mountain, which we had him climb a few. We crawled around like Anza Borrego Desert, the Mojave, Death Valley. We sent someone to climb a volcano in Hawaii. Somebody was hanging out in a marine research facility in Baja. There were several people in the Channel Islands with satellite modems, like posing as bird watchers. I had a guy in a kayak that day. I had a guy in a helicopter who did a flyover of a sewage facility in Point Loma. And, the other team was doing all this crazy stuff too. We found a bunch of portals that they'd use, like their own pilots who were flying planes to capture these portals that were in deep canyons where you couldn't even bring a satellite modem.
I suppose that it doesn't have a vertical limit. There's no Z limit. It's just only X, Y.
Right.
So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you can capture things from the air, although there is also a speed lock cutoff of. So supposedly it's 30 miles an hour, but based on the way it read you can actually do flyovers with planes if you do slow circular flights.
Okay.
But anyway. One of the places that the other team had captured for this tournament was a state prison down a couple miles from the Mexican border. So this is a state prison in unincorporated San Diego. Yeah. So the opposite team, they apparently had the good fortune to have a reliable player who worked there. But there was a portal on the inside. I think it was a mural or something that was either inside or adjacent to a courtyard. So anyway, the night before the tournament, the other team got a link up that ran down the middle of the play box, which was pretty inconvenient for us for strategic reasons. But we couldn't get to either end to take it down because at the other end, it was actually anchored on an aircraft carrier, which someone had visited on a tour earlier in the day. So the other end was the prison. So we had a choice of which one we could take down. And, we thought it was a pretty impossible challenge. But late that night, I got a report from one of our intel teams that they'd figured out how to get into the prison during the tournament. So I'm sure you cannot do this anymore because COVID. But apparently you could visit an inmate at this prison without the inmate's knowledge or consent. You just had to be dressed the right way. There were certain colors and fabrics that you couldn't wear. They also didn't confiscate your phone. So what we basically found out was that the guard only escorted you to a certain point, and they didn't at the time actually check to make sure that you visited anyone. I guess
What?
I guess a lot of people get cold feet, or maybe some people don't. Some people who visit inmates don't necessarily want specific records of their coming and going. I don't know, but apparently this worked. So we dressed somebody up in a collared shirt and slacks. We had them walk into the prison on the pretext of visiting an inmate. So they walked right in. They hung out in the courtyard next to this mural until we gave them a signal to capture the portal. Now, I actually had to coordinate this with the guy in the kayak and the guy in the helicopter. So that was a challenge. Basically at the right moment during the tournament, I'm sitting here staring at a bunch of computer screens from our command place in San Diego, and telling everybody exactly when to go and what to do. Now, I would have to say that in this case, the Smurfs actually did outplay us, because their employee was also camping on top of this portal. So as soon as we took it down, they put it right back up again. And I don't really feel bad about saying that, because we still won the tournament. But easy, if you're listening, well played.
The Smurfs being the Enlightened?
The Smurfs are the Resistance. They're the blue team. Yeah. The green team are the Toads.
Okay.
The Toads, I see.
Yes, the Toads and the
Smurfs and the
Smurfs.
Toads.
Yeah.
Wait, so for my own personal curiosity, and just to add more texture to the story,
Mm-hmm.
was it the kayak or the helicopter that was next to the aircraft carrier?
Is that?
Neither. The aircraft carrier was basically so it was on the San Diego waterfront, and they were giving tours earlier that day. So somebody on the opposite team just took one of those tours, captured the portal, and it turned out to come in handy. The kayak was actually stationed in Mission Bay, right outside of SeaWorld. Because there was a portal that we were going to use there to basically create a blocker that would prevent the other team from recreating this link that we were trying to take down. And the helicopter was hovering above a sewage facility in Point Loma. Pardon me. In Point Loma. So they were basically just waiting for the signal and the opportunity to block the link that we took down, which we were not able to do. But yeah, we missed our window by about 10 seconds.
That's an impressive amount of coordination for entertainment pastime. That is a lot. That's
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
Infiltrating a prison, and then you got a helicopter, and someone's in a kayak. We can't even get people to show up for podcast recording at the same time.
Not sure if Ingress mission or SEAL mission.
If podcasting involved a bit more helicopters, it's...
Well, so when did you start kind of thinking about this in the abstract, and the kind of the system dynamics aspects of it?
Well, the whole swarm intelligence thing started as kind of a metaphor, and it was, I would say, it came about as an attempt to address a couple of organizational problems that were very common in Ingress that I found out much later were fairly common in the real world as well. So when I was heavily involved in strategy and planning for these North American tournaments, I spent several hours a week debating tactics and organization with a small council of my teammates and friends. So the Niantic was infamous for only releasing the rules or the game format for tournaments very close to the actual tournament itself. So we had a lot of we needed to prepare for tournaments a lot of times without even knowing what the rules were. So it led to a lot of really interesting conversations about similarities and differences across the different game formats, as well as things like player ability and the role of leadership in a game where acknowledging authority is 100% voluntary. We read a whole lot of Sun Tzu and exchanged a whole lot of social engineering tips, but eventually we started asking the question a very different way, which was, how can we train players to instinctively do the right thing, no matter what the rules turn out to be? And I think one of the related problems that we were trying to solve was, how do you mitigate context switching, specifically from the organizer's point of view, in order to remain focused and sort of reduce organizational overhead? Because when you're trying to direct the movements of several hundred people all moving at the same time, you have to learn how to prioritize communications, and a lot of times you need to not just delegate, but empower the people on the ground who are acting on your behalf. So I think in games, particularly strategic games, when people start figuring out that they need to cooperate and they form guilds and communities, there's a certain they almost invariably come up with sort of a pyramid-shaped hierarchy just by default. Like, okay, so here's the rank and file players. Maybe they're new players, but they're basically just sort of your foot soldiers, right? And then maybe you have your more experienced players, and maybe they take over some of the organizational overhead, and they're maybe your middle management. And then maybe you have one person or a cabal of people at the very top who are sort of calling the shots and telling everybody what to do. And I run several tournaments and operations using that hierarchy, and it worked out for many things. But one thing that I found was that once a particular organization got to a certain size, usually right around 100 to 150 people, it kind of broke down. One person really couldn't effectively manage that many players. So either they needed to delegate some of those responsibilities, either delegate it down the chain, or basically you had to figure out how to effectively communicate your instructions and get everybody to do them without necessarily being able to interact with them one-on-one, because there are just too many people.
That number seems very close to the sort of like human cognitive tribe size limit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dunbar's number.
So I mean, my human cognitive cat herding limit is like less than 5 people, which has been proven. So so how did you sort of implement, or how did you address the sort of getting away from a hierarchical sort of top-down system? What you called that in your talk a brittle system.
Yes.
So how did you sort of transition from that to kind of thinking of it as more of a swarm process?
I think one of the things that really opened my mind to sort of decentralized methods of organization was a book that I ran across called, I'm completely going to murder his name pronunciation, but Rick Falkving, who's one of the founders of the Swedish Pirate Party, wrote an excellent book called Swarm Intelligence, the Tactical Manual for Changing the World. And this is a great book, by the way, and you can download it, I think, still for free from their website. And it's a pretty short read, but this is basically just a primer that this guy wrote as a result of his experiences during the or managing teams during the .com era. So Falkving wrote this book, Swarm Intelligence, to basically describe the behavior of human systems acting autonomously. And there were a number of ideas that he introduced that were kind of counterproductive for counterintuitive for this traditional kind of hierarchy. One of the things that he mentioned was like in the pirate party, they had something called the 3 pirate rule, where if three members of the pirate party all agreed on something, or that something was a worthwhile investment and use of the treasury funds, then they would automatically be granted access to the entire treasury to implement it. Which, if you have an organization that's of any specific size, you would think, letting 3 people determine, they can, or letting 3 people have access to the entire treasury to spend everything on, whatever they want seems ridiculous. But it worked very well for him for several years. But he also talks a lot about group sizes and what different group sizes are good for. You mentioned, that your organizational capacity tops out at about 5 people. There's actually a natural break point between 5 and 8 people, where if you have people that need to work closely with each other and actually make executive decisions, 5 to 8 is actually the sort of the sweet spot for that group size, because the amount of time and effort that it takes somebody to maintain more relationships than that, to the point where they can actually still create or make decisions effectively, it just goes up exponentially after that. So there's actually something to being more comfortable in smaller groups.
So going back to your talk a bit, so you mentioned another weakness of the hierarchical system is that they're easier to attack. I think that was where the like calling them brittle came in, because there's always someone at the top of the pyramid who is like a single point of failure for the entire group.
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately started thinking about red teaming, where they try and get into like the executive's mail spool, because typically it's easier to get into the executive's mail spool than almost anyone else in engineering.
Exactly.
And once you, because they don't have to follow the same rate as anyone else, because there isn't anyone else around to, right? So typically, until they get popped, they're not, they probably have a weaker password than anybody else, yada yada yada. And that was a particularly interesting insight. And I started thinking about sort of how the idea of swarm intelligence, or not having a hierarchical system, could be applied to red teaming, or that type of operation. And I don't know for like corporate red teaming if it's necessarily as applicable, but for something like anonymous, it's all like the same. That's kind of their MO, right? Like it's sort of cell based. There's they kind of agree on some sort of target, break into small groups, and then they all kind of go and do whatever. But there isn't necessarily a budget there, and there isn't necessarily any sort of they're just throwing as much against the wall as possible, and then if anything hits anything, they declare victory and move on, right?
Yes. Yeah. What I found when I was organizing, or I was using this strategy for organizing tournaments, one thing that I found was that it was very important to have to not just have a very strong sort of purpose, or I guess vision. You could call it a mission statement, I guess, but to make sure everybody understood and on board with why your swarm actually exists. For a game like Ingress, it's generally pretty easy, because people will do many crazy things just to win a game and say that they're the best or better than the other. But I think that's one thing where maybe Anonymous had fallen short, particularly in later years, was that that cohesion tended to fall apart without sort of a singular unifying theme. Another thing that you that I found that I needed to do was basically break down the mechanics of what I needed people to do down to first principles. Rather than telling people in the game, okay, this is the play that we're going to run, we're going to go here, and then at this point we're going to go here and do this action, because as we were all fond of saying, no plan of attack survives first contact with the enemy. Instead, I said, okay, so here are the basic game actions, which you all know because you've been playing this game for however long you've been playing. Here are the different actions that we're likely going to use. So you're going to when this part of the game happens, what I want you all to do is, if you see a blue portal, I want you to turn it green. If you see a green portal, I want you to, fill out all of the resonators and make it linkable. Once it's linkable, if you see it's linking, then I want you to put these mods on it to strengthen it, and then just move on. And then rather than having to tell everybody that every minute, you could just sort of let them go autonomously and do their own thing. And it was super effective in that it was very fast. There was not a whole lot of time lost to overhead or context switching for anybody who was trying to react to what the other team was doing.
So rather than doing something like
Mhm.
one comparison that comes to mind, because I've been watching some of these COVID NFL games because they're just so hilarious. Like I watched that Broncos game where they had a wide receiver as quarterback because they're like the four quarterbacks they had all got removed for COVID restrictions. So they're like, okay, I guess we're gonna have a wide receiver play. But oh man, it's a train wreck. Don't watch it. But the so football is kind of like a hierarchical thing, right? You've got the coach is calling the plays, and the people on the team, they know what they're doing for the particular play. They go out and do it. There's a little bit of it does get a little swarmy on the defensive side when you're not doing like zone defense, but like man on man coverage where everyone's just told go out there and follow the guy, right? You're each assigned a guy, just stick on him, right? But for the most part, when you get into like sign stealing, right? That's sort of attacking the top of the hierarchy where you're like maybe you're trying to get on the coach's radio, right? And if you can hear the play he's calling, you can just counteract it, right? So that's really kind of a hierarchical thing. So what you're saying, or what I'm hearing, is that instead of having those kind of rigid plays where everybody is acting in a coordinated way with each other, you're treating them all like individual agents in some kind of like genetic algorithm scheme where like everyone in each of the individual entities are given a set of general purpose. They're given like an algorithm. This is what you do in these micro situations. And then they don't need to phone home and ask for more instructions. They just keep doing their little program. It's kind of more like the game Screeps, actually, if you've played that.
I don't know that
one. It's on Steam. It's marvelous. You automate all these little robots by writing them all little JavaScript. And then they all just run their little scripts, and you try and coordinate all of your agents so that you win somehow.
But we're getting away from the football analogy. I was good.
Yeah. Well,
I was gonna laugh because I was like, "Wow, I never before realized how little Ben understood about football." But,
all I really know is having a quarterback is better than trying to have the wide receiver be the quarterback. I got that one down. Anyway,
yeah. So, for what it's worth, I have also seen this kind of decentralized strategy play out with some soccer plays as well. There's a wonderful, I think it's a TED Talk by mathematician Hannah Fry called "I Predict a Riot," where she basically takes, I think, a football game in Barcelona, and sort of talks it out in the same context. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely several examples of this happening in sports as well. The other thing that I think is also very important to note is that when you are doing this, it is imperative that you give your the people on the ground, or the end nodes of your swarm, some method of communicating with each other. A lot of times in these operations, just like our organization, the communications strategies that we use tend to be, you have one person who is like the lead strategist, who is, talking to their lieutenants or captains, and a lot of times information is being passed maybe through 2 or 3 different people before it actually gets to the ground, which, telephone game aside, it also it's not very quick. So if you can somehow empower some kind of communication that doesn't necessarily have to go through the person at the top, if there is one, and instead enable people to speak to each other, then one thing that you'll actually find is that a lot of times you start to see this very sort of group intelligence start to emerge, which I think is probably the most fascinating thing about this swarm intelligence idea, which is you have a hard problem. And if you kind of break down the steps that you think, or that you're going to need to solve this problem, and then you give it to everybody, and you say, okay, here's the goal. Here are the tools that we have to accomplish this goal. One thing that you will often find is that the people on the ground will end up solving problems in ways that no individual person could have done otherwise. And I think that's really where you get the synergy of swarm intelligence, is when you give people the tools that they need to basically solve the problem or do the job, and then get them talking to each other. That's really where the magic happens.
All right, so the recipe I've got for implementing this so far, there's some amount of basic training that everybody needs to have a kind of base level of competence, which is this sort of little algorithm that you described. Like, if it's blue, turn it green. If it's green, reinforce it. And I forgot what the other one was, but but there are going to be situations where that's not enough to kind of explain what you should do next, maybe. So if they have a way of talking to each other on a broad channel, then they can kind of help each other sort of figure out how to coordinate, or what the next sort of action should be, without having to go necessarily through central leadership. Is that right? Is that fair? Cool.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
So what else would you need for to cast the magic swarm intelligence spell?
Oh yeah, let's see. Purpose, mastery, and communication, I would say, were probably the main things. Yeah, I would say those are the main things, without getting any more specific with specific kinds of swarms. Sometimes you have a swarm that has a very generic sort of purpose. Like, just to pull an example out of the air, do your own research, follow the breadcrumbs. And yeah, Q is absolutely a swarm. And then you have if you leave it up to the people in this community how to interpret that and execute it, many times they will do so in ways that you don't anticipate. There's definitely advantages and disadvantages of that as well. If you have a very general sort of vision or purpose or mission statement, then when people interpret it, then it kind of increases the virality of the message itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does seem like purpose can be so in Ingress, purpose is clear. Like you're green, you want
Yeah.
blue, all
Smash-
things blue to be
yeah.
green.
Build green,
Right.
smash blue. It's pretty easy.
Yeah. But once you get into kind of meat space, where everyone's motives are really complicated and sometimes self-contradictory, or just entirely nonsensical, just because humans, right?
Yep.
Like agreeing on a common purpose seems like kind of ephemeral or hard to define.
I mean, this is how like terrorist cells work, right? I mean, we talked
Well-
about Anonymous earlier. Like, arguably, like early Anonymous was more effective because the goal was very simple: lulz, and the how
Yeah.
of the goal was let's go DDoS these 4 Scientology sites, like super specific. And then later it was like random, blah 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 blah. But like, Al Qaeda is for the most part like probably still as effective.
Well, or like the IRA had a pretty, simple universal goal for the most part, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
by Ireland, yeah.
but I mean, as time went on, that shifted too.
Didn't
they
Amazon recently unify
Yeah.
Ireland, by the way?
yeah, right.
I mean, a different like, would it be more? I don't know if this is constructive, but the way of summarizing, like, purpose is outcome, right? Like, by it, the more clarity in the outcome that you can define, the more effective the message.
Maybe sometimes I would say. I don't know. I mean, to take the example of Q again, it becomes a lot more difficult to mobilize everybody at once for any kind of action.
Right, accessibility at the exchange of efficacy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Q thing actually kind of brings me to another question I wanted to ask, which is that so in a conflict like in Ingress, if you had one team that was using swarm tactics and another team that was just entirely top down, let's say the blue team was a strict hierarchy, right? And they didn't like anyone operating without explicit orders from someone in the rank above them. That would be an obvious weakness for blue. They'd be much slower to react to anything. And green would basically always win, you'd figure, right? So what interests me is, what happens when it turns into swarm versus swarm? And I wasn't going to use Q as an example because I'm not I didn't. That's kind of like complicated, and I haven't read the whole website. Like if you think I don't understand football, holy shit! Like having me explain Q is going to be incredibly painful for all involved. But the kind of example I was thinking of is, there after the Iraq War, the second one, I guess. Or maybe not after the first few years of the second Iraq War, during the time of all the anti-war protests, there were a lot of groups that started up that there were some predecessors for, but like things like Unicorn Riot, which was a group that trained protesters on how to be protesters. And there was another one out of San Francisco. I forgot the name of it. It was like Propeller or something. But they would do protester trainings, and they started out very kind of tactical, ground level stuff. Here's how you join arms, and here's how you deal with tear gas, and here's how you get arrested. That was kind of the first version. And as time went on, they kind of evolved into more like, here's how you develop a message, and here's how you get on TV with talking points, and here's how you do a press release, and here's how you recruit people, and that's sort of a swarm-based, tactic, right? Like it's almost following your playbook. They're doing the training, they're setting up. They would also like set up ways of communicating with each other, so that different groups could talk to each other and share, tips and tricks and so on. But then on the flip side of that, you had the in the beginning it was just trolls, like regular garden variety trolls, and then those sort of evolved into like the alt-right trolls, which were a bit more organized. They had like common communications mechanisms, and they started using sort of common tactics. Like there was a lot of like meme sharing, and they would like congregate on certain boards and sort of refine their messaging in a more or less decentralized way. But it was a little less. It was almost sort of a different kind of swarm algorithm, right? And you'd see it when there was like a protest and a counter protest. You could see that one side was using a particular, set of agent strategies, and the other side was had spent a lot more time on the messaging and had very little idea what to do when they actually showed up on the day, right?
Yeah.
Like CIA dropping leaflets and teaching people how to build, how to make Molotov cocktails and stuff, and not telling them when to do it. Just be like, or like what was it? There's like the anonymous giant like pallets of bricks that started showing up to protest for like no apparent reason.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Told anyone to use them, they were just there.
Building a barbecue in the middle of New York.
But yeah, I remember seeing pamphlets. Maybe it was just a couple of months ago, like the hold the line ones that were basically just like they were meant to be maybe a little complicated for sort of swarm marching instructions, but they were fairly short PDFs that were like, okay, so this is what to do if the United States ends up in a coup attempt. This is how this is what you should consider doing, and then shared widely on Facebook. And I thought that was a pretty effective example of sort of giving people the tools that they might need to act either individually or or as a group.
So I guess I'm assuming when in the actual Ingress game that the other side was using a somewhat similar swarm strategy at some point to stay competitive, or were they?
I wouldn't. I never ran across anybody actually using the exact same tactic. There's not a whole lot of information or strategic information that passes from one faction to the other, just basically because we're all used to keeping secrets from one another. So it's hard to say if that was actually their intention. I did run across a couple of tournaments where they seemed to be doing very, very similar ground tactics, and they seem to be moving too fast to be organized by or taking orders from like a singular entity. And I don't think I ever actually saw swarm versus swarm. However, on all of the sort of tabletop conversations that my fellow strategists and I had said, basically it would all come down to reaction time, and who would basically get to execute their strategy first. Because once one side implemented their strategy, it was then the other team would basically be forced to react to them as opposed to proactively executing their own strategies. So we guess that if it was ever going to happen, it would basically come down to speed and numbers, because it's basically a game where if you significantly outnumber the opposing team, then you're probably going to win anyway.
So I have a couple questions, and they go in two different directions, and kind of the practical aspects of the swarm tactics that you use in the game. One, did you find the need to standardize how each node in the swarm was communicating to one another, or was that basically all just self-sorted? People just figured out a quick hand, shorthand language. Like, did they just figure out their own nomenclature, or was that something that you kind of had to apply some structure to in the beginning?
Well, I would say for communications in tournaments themselves, when facilitating communications between ground teams, we would encourage them to speak to their nearest neighbors, like face to face. Because that's I mean, if you are face to face with somebody, that's going to be the fastest way that you can relay information to them anyway. We also had some pretty complicated comms platforms breakdowns that involved Zoom, Zello, Discord, basically video, voice, and sound chats. So it was certainly something that we spent a lot of time working out what chat platforms to use. But also, I would say even before the actual tournament happened, there were the periods in between tournaments where we were, just playing the game. Some of us did expend some effort basically developing a common language and common nomenclature across different play communities. The language of fielding actually owes quite a bit to a lot of project management terms. We even still refer to obstacles as blockers, except in Ingress, they are often literally blocking something. But another thing that we also spent quite a bit of time doing was sort of encouraging and developing the specialized language, not just to talk about these in-game concepts, but also to develop tribal identity. One of the most effective ways that we found to sort of create an atmosphere of inclusion and identity, and exclusion from the bad guys, the other team, was basically to have that specialized language.
And whatnot. Did you say Zillow?
No, Zello. It's a walkie-talkie
Zello.
applicant. Yes.
Oh, okay, all right. I was
Yeah.
like,
Ben
I thought you
is
were
like raking his mind at how you were using Zillow for comms. It's spun
I was-
off.
it's like maybe you could drop a pin on the map somewhere and register as a real estate agent, and then people could be like, contact the agent. I had a whole thing going. Okay, Zello, I'll check that out.
Yeah, Zello.
So the second question I had was, for these competitions, for the tournaments that did the organization ever become so complex that you had specialization within the swarm? Meaning that you had distributed function, but was every node performing every action, or did you ever get to a state where there were subsets of nodes that were performing specific actions, just as a
People take down portals
for speed and optimization? Yeah.
Great question. Specialized roles were still very much a thing. We had, and a lot of times in tournaments, they basically broke down by mobility type. Some people would be on foot, some people would be in cars, some people would be on bikes, which basically determined how quickly they could move, but which also, and how many of them there were. A lot of times this would break down into individual teams, but yeah, there were people who were more mobile and move faster. A lot of times they would be in more of a if you play strategy games, more of a cavalry scouting type role. Whereas if you had, say, 4 people and they were all moving in a vehicle, they would a lot of times be much slower because of traffic, but there were also many times be 4 people in the car, which meant that they would be that much more effective. So they would be more like heavy infantry. So you still have that specialization of roles, and then of course the strategists and operators who are watching the game on computer screens and relaying information. So yeah, definitely the specialization still very much a thing. However, it was not always the case that they would have specialized instructions. Sometimes you could just say to everybody, if it's blue, make it green. It doesn't matter who you are.
Was it I'm inferring here, but I'm interested in the answer. Did the role was specialization of role something that happened organically? Would individuals transition different specialized states throughout the game, or was that something that was kind of like fixed for the duration of the tournament?
It was usually fixed unless unforeseen circumstances like an injury. Sometimes if somebody got tired of walking, or if it was too hot and they didn't feel well, we would have somebody in a car go pick them up, and then they would be on that car team for the rest of the day. So most of the time it was set up ahead of time before the tournament, so people had a certain expectation, but there were certainly situations in which it could change.
Awesome.
Is this game still going? Are you still playing?
I'm mostly retired. I still have it installed on my phone, but the game itself has lost a lot of players just within the last couple of years. It's hard to tell how much of it is actually due to Pokemon, which is of course much more popular. And they also had a rather unpopular version of the game that they issued a couple years ago, which drove a couple of the veteran players away. Basically, just the game itself has changed. It's a lot smaller than it used to be, and I think once I started to realize that a lot of this information was relevant and interesting to the outside world, that was about when I realized that I needed to change careers. That was about when I met all of you. So yeah, and I just kept doing more and more infosec, and Ingress kind of took a backstage, I think.
It would be really kind of interesting to me is for you to if you like met the leader of the blue team like from the same region, like from the time you were playing, to like compare notes, because like it's really
before COVID we had lunch once a month.
Oh really?
Yes.
So what did you learn about like how the blue team was different?
Well, I mean, both of us were of course very good at the game, so a lot of our lunches were games of let's see if I can get you to tell me more than I'm telling you. But there are a lot of things that I learned from the other team. I think some of the there were some areas in which they decentralized their communications that we never did, I think, as a faction. And I think the other team, certainly in our region, was more heavily dependent on technology-based tools as opposed to trying to optimize human interactions and processes, which was sort of my thing when I was organizing. So there were for a pair of teams for which there is no real reason why any of the demographics should be any different. They're still quite a bit different. The way we ended up doing things just evolved very differently. And I think a lot of it had to do with the player generations in the game were very short, somewhere between 3 and 6 months it takes for somebody to reach the highest levels of the game and sort of figure out what they want to do in the game. So a lot of changes in the game happened to each faction just based on the ideas or actions of maybe just a handful of players at the right place and the right time. So it's kind of interesting just seeing some of the parallel evolution and some of the differences that each faction ran into.
I'm imagining every Cold War movie I've seen where like the Russian spy master and the American spy master have like coffee or whatever, like meet at a bar.
Yeah, once the Cold War's over, right? Yeah.
Archer with
during where the counterparts know each other during the conflict, like there's always that thing, right? Where,
well, we started
like
having lunch because of
number,
we started having having lunch together because of some sort of I guess IRL problems that our players were having that were sort of bringing down the game for both teams. especially in this region, both teams are very competitive and very highly motivated players, and very tribal. So a lot of times there would be sometimes the game would be taken a little too far. People would get stalked, harassed, followed around when they were on vacation. So it was very helpful, I think, to be able to have that relationship with somebody on the opposite team and be able to say when it was truly necessary, hey, we should probably not do this anymore. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But
So you had to
setting up
do like a
rules of
Smurf.
engagement.
Yeah, you had to do a Smurfs are people too campaign.
I wouldn't go that far.
Oh, all right.
I wonder how much of the sort of difference in the personalities that you're describing of the two different teams comes down to, because like the real difference is green, blue, and resistance and enlightened. So like, and you make a sort of gut choice when you first join, right? As whether or not you're going to be on the resistance or the enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if that like causes sort of minor, maybe, but personality distinction between
built-in
teams.
tribalism.
Yeah,
based on bias of selection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering what bias that injected. Just the difference between colors, the two colors in the
Imagine if they'd had red and blue as the colors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when the game first started, they actually had in the initial faction selection screen, it was significantly more difficult for you to choose green than blue.
Really?
It would tell you, okay, this is what the resistance believes. Click here to join the resistance, and then you actually had to choose no, and then it would say, okay, well, this is what the enlightened believes. Click here to join the enlightened. I think the game had been around for about 4 years when they finally swapped it. But at that point, it was difficult to say whether there were more resistance than enlightened globally. It probably didn't matter. However, there is some psychology that people will pick blue overwhelmingly over green because it is a more preferred color. However, I think the number one thing that affected somebody's choice over what team they would choose is what their friends were choosing. And I think that's where you get the tribalism. A lot of times you would get entire enclaves of players that were they would only be one color in a certain area because they all worked together, and that would be like, say, where the Microsoft campus was, or everybody over there is on the blue team because they're all friends, that kind of thing. So that, I think, probably contributed to a bit of difference in how each team in specific regions ended up. But I don't. It's really interesting because you'd think blue versus green, they're very neutral sort of choices, and there is no reason why people would pick one or the other. But still, there would be distinct differences in the actual communities themselves.
I'm actually really curious, like how, like why it didn't just descend into anarchy. You know what I mean? Like what did you or what did people do to make other people actually listen to them instead of just being like, I'm gonna do it my way, and just which seems like to be the normal way that humans do everything to me. So I'm extremely captivated by people who actually know how to social engineer on that level.
Organizing hackers is the worst.
It really is. We're terrible.
Yeah.
That's actually why I wanted to. I'm so excited to have you on here because I want to get to all of the how do we organize hackers questions.
Oh yeah, and it's it's definitely it could be its own talk. Yeah. But yeah, that is sort of what social engineering is all about. Ingress, I think, was a little bit easier than real life because, again, you're playing a game and you have that built-in dopamine button to rely on. Everybody wants to win, and especially if you're cooperating with a big group of other people, there's certain it can feel really good when you are cooperating with other people to achieve that win as well. So it was a lot easier to social engineer somebody in that situation because they are already primed to listen to what you want to do, especially if you have a track record of winning a lot, and a lot of people to say, hey, when this person is leading the charge, then the operation tends to be a success. Everybody tends to find a worthwhile experience, and people have fun. So we're gonna do what this person says. So I think that was part of it. But yeah, I mean, there are many organizational and sort of social engineering tips that we and hacks that we developed over the years to sort of get people to all move in the same direction, even though we didn't hold any elections, and we couldn't really bribe people or compel them to do what we wanted.
I mean, like what?
Yeah, examples.
Yes, that is exactly what I want to know.
Let's see here. Well, the times when we were doing these operations, we would run into like a rural player who was playing their own way that in some way, shape, or form was inhibiting us from doing this larger field that we wanted to do. So a lot of times these rural players, they're not really connected to the larger game, and they don't really have any reason to say, they don't have any reason to listen to a stranger who reaches out to them in the public chat and says, hey, I need you to stop doing what you're doing right away and do something else. So instead, what I would say is I would tell somebody like, hey, you are, I would present it to them like they had been not only chosen to participate in this super secret operation for the team, but that nobody else could do it but them. Like everybody, the entire team was relying on them, and that a lot of times that was very effective. I mean, many times.
I feel like you literally just described QAnon.
Wait. So let me get it straight. You hit him with the burning bush.
City disconnect where.
Yeah, I hit him with the burning bush.
You are the chosen one. You have been selected for this mission. You will save us all. Is that really the way this goes? That's amazing.
Well, sometimes. I mean, there's a certain like there's some psychology behind the idea that people will go the extra mile if they feel like they are a character in a story, like if they're a hero in their own tale. So a lot of times I would pitch these operations as sort of heroic operations, and make sure not only that everybody was everybody felt like they knew that they were important. They knew that they were what they were doing was meaningful and appreciated. Which, I mean, sounds very basic and kind of a no-brainer when you think about it. But but if you can convince people and make them feel like they are that they are part of a whole that they trust, and if they just do their part, then and everybody else does their part, then while the operation might not necessarily be a success, it will still be a worthwhile experience because XYZ. Then a lot of times they will be willing to go the extra mile for that. I mean, there's a lot of, I think there's certainly a lot of power with gamification in itself as well. I mean, gamification is probably the single most effective motivator that we as the human race has managed to come up with. It will get people almost every time devoted to go against their own self-interest, because just because they're trying to win, they're trying to prove that they're better than everybody else, or they're just trying to accomplish this one goal. So that's certainly something that's very powerful as well. But I think when it comes to social engineering, my own sort of personal my personal philosophy has to do with just building healthy relationships with people, and building that common respect and that rapport, before you need it. That way, when you ask them to do something difficult, then if they're not able to do so, then a lot of times they'll either be able to tell you why, or sometimes refer you to the right person.
Not good at that.
Well, you mentioned this in your talk as well, and I thought that was actually a really interesting bit, because you tie it directly to neuroscience, right? You mentioned the gamification is the most powerful motivator that we've come up with, because winning a game causes like the dopamine reward reaction.
Yep.
And being a member of a group triggers oxytocin.
Yes.
Which is like the love neurotransmitter.
Yes. So does petting a dog, but you can't always bring those with you. It helped though.
So China, gotcha.
But with Ingress, it's like it's already a game,
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on making like gamifying things that weren't games to begin with. And I think that one thing I learned just now is sort of making people feel like they're a heroic character in a story, rather than an NPC.
Right.
And that's probably an element of it.
There's definitely, I think, a lot about life these days that makes you feel a lot like an NPC.
especially, I mean, when I work retail, I'm like, I'm absolutely a non-player character in this world. You're the shopkeeper. But I'm wondering if anything else springs to mind about what does gamification mean? It's like you're a character in a story. There is a obvious win condition, or what?
Yeah, some people would say that that competition, like leaderboards, is an integral part of it. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think leaderboards and being able to see your progress, and maybe your progress compared to everybody else who was engaged in a similar activity, can be helpful for a certain kind of person. However, it can also be very discouraging, I think, for another type of person, or even the same person under a very different set of circumstances. But that is one tactic of gamification that has been used, I think, in used throughout history. I think that if you can portray an activity as not just a task to be done, but something. If you can draw a connection from somebody's efforts to the sort of the outcome, then that can kind of set up the gamification a bit. When I did operations, a lot of times I would refer to them specifically as parties instead of operations, because I wanted everybody. The number one thing when I was doing recruiting was that I needed to make sure I had enough people. So rather than being a little bit more exclusive and only interviewing and verifying that only the right people, the people that I knew could show up on time and keep secrets, that only they could participate. I think I ended up intentionally becoming a little bit more inclusive, and sort of casting a wider net in recruiting, and saying, hey, this is fun, everybody should show up and do this. It's really easy, we'll teach you how to do it. And before I started doing that, there was this idea that a lot of these operations were very exclusive and secretive, and something you could only do once you proved yourself. So I think when I started pitching them as more casual affairs that anybody could learn how to do, and again, sort of encouraging that party atmosphere, that it's, hey, this is a game that we're playing, as opposed to this is something very difficult that if you don't do right, we're going to get mad at you and you're never going to be allowed to do this again. I think that probably got me, although not everybody that I included ended up sticking with it, I think it gave me a larger pool of people to work with. and I think they were more inclined to approach it with an open mind, and which of course made them a little bit more inclined to accept whatever it was that I was telling them they needed to do, which sometimes was, I need you to hike 3 miles, or I need you to stay where you are for another hour and not move. And so I think when you spend that time sort of building that tribal identity and building that sort of sense of fun, then I think that sets up the gamification a little bit more effectively than just saying, here's your scoreboard. This is how everybody's doing.
So, to build a sense of fun, did you just do it by describing it, or was there cake, or or like were there other elements to make it more of a party?
Well, all of the above. So after every operation, we would usually have an after party, usually at a bar or a restaurant. Nowadays, if we would do it, we would probably do a Zoom party. So there was that, and that we would always do whether or not the operation was a success. But for successful operations, I would also, encourage people to take photographs of wherever they were and post them into a central chat so that we could have like a sort of a pictorial reference of what we did. And then we would create these after action reports and post them to Google Plus, which was the primary platform of Ingress communications at the time. So yes, Ingress players were actually the third largest group using Google Plus at the time, coming in just behind Google employees and I think wilderness photographers. But we would post these after action reports with all of the photos of. We would of course get permission from people to post their photos, but we would post the photos, and I would basically write an epic about the operation, and sort of going back to that idea of people wanting to view themselves as heroes in a story. So these after action reports that I would write would basically honor everybody's contribution and sort of tell the story of the operation and how we did it in a way that was very that allowed us all to celebrate all of our efforts and kind of thumb our noses at the other team saying, yeah, we just did this awesome thing and you didn't. So that's I think those were very effective techniques for making people feel good about the operation, even when it wasn't a success, as many of them were not.
Do you have any if I'm having difficulty scheduling podcast recording sessions, would you have any specific advice as to how I could make this into more of a game?
He wants to know. He wants to know exactly what brand of cake he's supposed to buy for
exactly
to incentivize
literally
our participation.
That is right.
You just gotta get me that mate.
The answer, of course, is whatever type your guest's favorite is, and you have to figure out who it is, or figure out what their favorite cake is. So yeah, I mean, you basically have to do when you're figuring out the effective way of using or social engineering a target, whether it's somebody in a game where you need them to do something or anything else, you do need to do recon, you do need to do research, you need to figure out what your target what their goals are and figure out a way to align your goals with theirs. There's a lot of other social engineering techniques out there that rely on being a plausible liar. I'm very bad at that. The only way that I have ever really been able to persuade anybody to do anything is basically just finding out what their goals are, finding out a way that I can align my goal with theirs, and going from there. I guess I don't know if that's quite the same thing as enlightened self-interest, but it's pretty close, I think.
This has been really incredible to talk to you, because it's almost like being able to interview like a cult leader or the head of a terrorist organization or something. But there's nothing to hide,
But
right?
but
There's nothing-
totally PG, like
Yeah,
everything
totally
above
PG.
board.
Yeah.
Is this the part where I tell you that we actually did found a religion? Technically, I am a cult leader.
Nice.
Not shocked.
I don't
You
think
clearly have all the
anything-
skills required.
Honestly, if you didn't add that subtext, pretty sure everyone came to that conclusion anyway. As you describe the whole process, I'm pretty sure everybody basically assumed that was the case. But it's good to know that it's been confirmed.
Yeah, the clan that we created for all of these triangles, we called it the Mu-Tang clan, where Mu is it stands for mind units, which is the what they call points in the game.
That's
But
amazing.
yeah, one day we ended up we got some challenge coins. Challenge coins, by the way, are a great social engineering tool. But challenge coins printed and some T-shirts that had like a modified prayer on the back that was praying to a fictitious character in the game to help us create these green triangles. Anyway, it was one of those things that we just created one morning while we were bored, but it went viral in the game, and maybe about a year later we actually had two people who registered the Wu-Tang Clan. Actually, I think they called it the Church of St. Jarvis as a religion in the state of Washington, and it now has two priestesses that have actually officiated weddings in the state of Washington. So I started a cult.
Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to fuck with.
That's right.
Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to fuck with. Amazing.
Does that mean that they can get federal exemption on taxes?
I mean, yeah, marrying people and avoiding taxes, that's the check boxes to be a religion. Yeah.
It really is.
The katakana, one of the three quote unquote Japanese alphabets, the mu is one of the syllables, and the character for that actually looks like a triangle, basically. So.
Oh, that's great. I would love a picture of that. I would love to see what that looks like.
We'll include it in the references for the episode.
Let's put it in chat right now.
We always have the little data links. We'll just embed the specific the specific kanji.
That's great.
I think are we moving towards wrapping up?
Yeah. Well, so there's one element that I want to add, so that I'm not historically recording this after the fact. So in that, as you were talking about the parallel efforts around community building and gamification of the activities, one of the things, a third dimension that I heard in there that I don't know if it was maybe part of the slide content or not, but it was also commoditization to an effect, right? You were basically saying, I can take a larger group of people that may be perceived as being less skilled, but by giving them a simplified set of instructions, by creating this organized structure around them, I'm making them as effective, or in some cases more effective, than the opposing team, right? That might be using stronger selectivity on membership. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's another dimension of this that should probably get called out, right? Like it's if you can distribute and parallelize on what are perceived to be less effective nodes, but you have functionally more nodes, that's still a good thing, as long as the burden of organizing them does not exceed the benefit, right? And in this case, it clearly doesn't, as a result of the whole swarm intelligence angle of organization and driving. So really awesome. Congratulations. Sounds like an amazing game. I wish I got to participate in it.
I have to say, when I watched your talk, the DEF CON talk, we'll definitely link in the comments. I had one of those. It was one of those like things I recognized from the world, but it really, all of a sudden, I just sort of I understood how all of these pieces kind of fit in a bigger picture to talk about it. And I don't know exactly how to describe that sensation, but I really enjoyed
that. Well, thank you so much for saying that, because I think outside of the game, my entire motivation was to basically distill it and strip away the actual trappings of the game, so that people who were not deeply immersed in the rules of how to make triangles would actually understand it and how take value from it. So I think what you are experiencing tells me that maybe I've succeeded in a small way. So thank you so much for that.
Definitely.
I would absolutely plus
Totally.
one that you succeeded in that regard.
+1.
Yeah. You could write
Bringing back the Google Plus.
you could write one of those. You could write one of those business books. You know,
Yeah, definitely.
like yeah.
Maybe next
Yeah,
year.
that's a whole different brand of cult, but maybe potentially more enriching. Not sure.
Yeah.
I haven't
Or
really
just-
figured that out yet.
Or just start a regular cult. But
Right.
the other thing is that like the talk was 2 years ago, but I think these topics are becoming more and more relevant. You know, like at a rate that's terrifying as we're now living in a world of cults. You know,
Absolutely.
more
Yeah.
than we were 2 years ago. You know,
There's an element of the material that's a bit timeless, right? It just has to do with hierarchical structures of people, and there's always plenty of those around. It seems.
I think it's
Yep.
specifically relevant because the barrier to entry to high capability technological systems is starting to lower enough that quote unquote normal people have access to them. And so now all of a sudden, like, hopefully to not put too blunt a point on it, you can now be more effective by being a good social engineer who knows how to make memes that can convince a bunch of people to do a technological task than you ever could be over the past 25 years of just being a really good hacker. Like, you will never be good enough as the person who can motivate the swarm. And so that makes all of the known tactics of splinter cell ideology that intelligence services have been looking at for literally 50 to 100 years, like, suddenly relevant.
Isn't that what Google did with Kubernetes?
I mean, that's what everybody did with everything. Like, Google did it with Kubernetes. Consultant shops have been doing it recently with software stuff. Like, I mean, the list goes on, right? Like,
I mean, it's kind of like the bug bounty-ish in a way, but I think most actual bug bounty programs aren't organized this well. You know, so I think you could probably apply some of these to the concept of a bug bounty and kind of swarmify, you know, red teaming a little bit more.
Ben's just getting some shots in early before we actually do a bug bounty podcast.
Yeah, we're gearing up to do another rant episode on the topic of bug bounties.
We should have Pitts back on because he put out a blog post about his year of bug bountying.
Yeah,
I scrolled through that. That was it was fun. It was fun for me to read because it basically echoed most of my attitude and impression in relation to bug bounty as well. So,
well, that's for next episode. We got to save some content.
Well, so I want to thank all of you for helping us win today in our glorious and heroic victory over the forces of bad podcasts.
boredom.
And boredom. How am I doing?
Great. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. The cornier it sounds, the better off you are.
So thanks to Dan and Mitchell and Virus and Max. We couldn't have done it without you. And a special thanks to Pongo. Really, really great having you here. I think that I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody else did too. So to put a cap on it, we'll say goodbye. And now more than ever, hacking is not just a crime. It's a survival.
It's a survival trait.